Hey, ghoul friend. It's me, Adrian, or Ayden. Either way, I want to ask you to wish Susto a happy birthday. As we celebrate the upcoming 5th anniversary of Susto and its dedication to exploring the rich tapestry of Latin American and Hispanic folklore, I invite you to join me in taking this paranormal project to the next level. Over the past 5 years, I've delved deep into the mysterious realms of ghostly apparitions, supernatural legends, and chilling tales that have captivated audiences worldwide. Now, as I embark on the next chapter of this journey into the unknown, I need your support to enhance your experience as a listener. Your generous donation will allow me to invest in a new recording setup, ensuring that future spine-chilling narratives are captured with crystal ball clarity and devilish detail. With upgraded equipment, I'll be able to host ghoulish guests with greater ease and transport you even deeper into the heart of darkness, where legends come alive and the paranormal awaits. Every dollar contributed will aid in advancing the quality of Susto, enabling me to continue preserving and sharing the enchanting folklore of Latin American and Hispanic cultures with the world. Join me in celebrating 5 years of fear-inducing tales and help me amplify this spooky saga for many more to come. Together, we can unlock the secrets of the supernatural and keep the spirit of storytelling alive. To make a donation, you can visit gofund.me/10bcdc27. Thank you for your support, and may the spirits guide you on your journey through the unknown. Eternally yours, Adrian or Ayden. Either way. Hey, ghoul friends. It's me, Adrian, or Ayden. Either way, I am still your host, and you are still listening to Susto, the podcast of ooky, spooky, scary stories. The award-winning podcast, I should say. This is a conversation that I have been having with some of my ghoul friends online. An event I did recently in Harlingen, you may have seen. I went to a school to speak and talk to the community a bit about Susto and folklore, specifically folklore in the Rio Grande Valley, which is where I'm from, if you don't know. And in some of the promotion for that, they wrote out award-winning podcast. And that's something that I've never asked people to do before, but I guess other people saw it and they were like, yeah, it's true and it should be said. So I don't know, maybe moving forward, I will toot my own horn more and ask people to include that, I guess, moniker, or would that be an adjective? I don't know. Anyway, basically to include award-winning before talking about the podcast, which I don't know, it feels weird to say, but also I'm like, I mean, I guess I should, right? I don't know. You let me know what you think. Speaking of awards, we have made it as a finalist to the Austin Chronicles Best of Austin in the podcast category and the podcast host category. I am, of course, so very excited and so grateful to everybody who took the time to write me in. And I only really campaigned for the best podcast category. And surprise, lo and behold, I was also nominated for best host. And I didn't ask about that, and I'm just like, wow, they really like me. So thank you all for doing that. Yeah, I'm a finalist in 2 categories and I need your help. This is the final push. That first round was, of course, nomination rounds. We've made it in, and now we are going for the title. So if you have not yet, please visit vote.austinchronicle.com, and then you'll register really quick and you'll scroll down to the politics and media section, and then you scroll down and you will select the podcast category and then the radio or podcast host category, and vote for me in both of those. So again, 2 separate categories, Susto for best podcast and me, Ayden Castellanos, for best radio or podcast host. Voting ends May 20th at 11:59 p.m. So you have until the end of May 20th to vote. You do not need to be an Austin resident. As far as I know, as far as I've seen, you don't even have to live in Texas. So for all of my ghoul friends out there, this is one of those ways that is easy and free to support the show, and it would mean so much to me. Obviously, even being nominated at all and making it as a finalist is a huge honor in and of itself. And I am up there along with some amazing, great, and also deserving creators. So I would deeply, deeply, gravely appreciate your support. Again, vote.austinchronicle.com, and of course the link is in my bio and I've posted it across social media, so you can go ahead and visit around any of those and put your votes in for that. All very exciting. And speaking of exciting, I have an event this weekend, so you're probably listening to this on Thursday or on Wednesday if you are a patron, because you get early and ad-free access to episodes. But this Saturday, the 18th, I'm going to be at Victoria's Black Swan Inn in San Antonio with the Curious Twins Paranormal team for their Psychic and Spirit Festival. If you have not already gotten your tickets, make sure to get those. I don't know how many will be available at the door, but again, the link is in my bio. I've been posting it everywhere on social media, so you can visit there. I will be tabling all day and I will be doing a presentation. Actually, I'm going to be doing a presentation on what today's episode is. I will be doing a presentation on Curanderismo, so it's going to be majority the same content, but at the event, of course, I'm going to have a Q&A. We'll be able to talk about it more in depth. It'll be in person, so if you're going to be at the event this Saturday and you don't want to hear the presentation or any spoilers before you're there, feel free to glaze over this episode. Again, it's going to be different in person, but I wanted to make sure that everybody would have a chance to hear this presentation. And depending on which tier you're in on patreon.com/sustopodcast, you will have access to the presentation. I will be uploading it on there for anyone who has access to the Susto Google Docs. I think that is pretty much all I have for you in terms of updates. As always, if you have your own scary story that you would like me to share in a Letters from the Beyond episode, or if you have a picture, video, audio recording, anything you think is spooky that I should share either on the show or on social media, you already know how to get that to me. Send it in an email, a DM on social media, leave it in a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts, leave it in the Q&A on Spotify, or submit it via the website www.sustopodcast.com and hit the contact button. Now let's get into today's episode, which, as I've said, is about Curanderismo.
Hey, what's up? I'm Charlie.
And I'm Tyler.
And we are Believing the Bizarre,
a paranormal podcast that dives into the unknown and the unusual every Tuesday.
We discuss hauntings, cryptids, aliens, UFO encounters, conspiracies, and more.
And we break down whether or not we find them believable.
All right, listen, if you're not paying for electricity, you're not paying for dinner.
Saw a terrifying looking face pressed to the window with gaping eyes.
Almost reached it when the laughter stopped suddenly, and a sound behind me made me turn around.
Sorry, I was gonna do it, but then I had SpaceX.
So we got you covered, whether you like horror or laughs, or both. We actually really hope it's both.
With over 3 million downloads, you'll be joining a bizarro community that we promise is more than just Mothman and our parents.
We even take creepy stories from our listeners and turn them into episodes.
Check out Believing the Bizarre on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Believing the Bizarre, a podcast as bizarre as you are.
All right, cool, friends. So because this episode is based off of a presentation, I'm going to be going through it slide by slide, which kind of makes things a little easier in terms of organization. But the first thing that I want to talk about is what Curanderismo is for people who may not know. So I have a source here from the National Library of Medicine. This is an article by Dr. Ronaldo Maduro, and this looks like it was written in 1983. The article is called Curanderismo and Latino Views of Disease and Curing. I read through this PDF. It was maybe about 7 pages around there. And to lightly paraphrase some of the content throughout the article, I put together this blurb. And to explain what Curanderismo is, it says, Curanderismo is a diverse folk healing system of Latin America for healing the mind, body, and spirit. It is not just a ragtag collection of superstitions. Rather, it involves a coherent worldview of healing that has deep historical roots. Latina people seek help from curanderes who offer a source of diagnosis and treatment for psychopathology that never gets formally reported elsewhere. And I'm using the term curanderes instead of curandero or curandera just to keep things kind of gender neutral and open for everybody, because people of all genders practice curanderismo. To continue, I have here, Curanderismo is syncretic, eclectic, and holistic. It is a mixture of beliefs derived from indigenous Spanish, spiritualistic, homeopathic, and modern, quote, scientific medicine. There is no support for the myth that because the folk system exists, Latina people cannot or do not respond resourcefully to psychotherapy or other treatment modalities when they are culturally relevant. So just to kind of paraphrase that again, I really want to emphasize this because I'd like to talk about this a lot, about mental health, especially relating to Latina and Hispanic people and trauma, which is something that we talk about often on Susto, right? But I appreciate that this emphasized that although we have these traditional healing methods, so to speak, that we will ignore, and we being the collective Latina and Hispanic diaspora, right, will ignore or put aside, quote, scientific or biomedical treatment. So doctors, right? But also, and this is something that I really, really love because this reminds me of the work that I did when I was working at the HIV and STI clinic, was this idea of culturally relevant treatment. So what that means, and what it meant to me, at least when I was working in that industry, so to speak, it's basically meeting the community or meeting your patients where they are at. So it's making these resources accessible and understandable to these communities. Not only do people have a preference to the traditional healing methods like curanderismo, but that compiled with the distrust that was formed over many decades, centuries even, it leads to people seeking help from other kind of outlets, if you will. And I think I've mentioned this before, definitely in the Soul Solace episode with Monica, where we talk about curanderismo, we talk about her work as a curandera. I mentioned how when I became very ill, we went to the curandera that lived on the other side of the block. My mom took me to her before I went to the hospital. And again, it's one of those things where, I'll never know what the treatment she prescribed would have done for me because I ran out of time to do it before I needed to go to the hospital. But I think that's a perfect example of kind of using those things in tandem. Is we did have every intention of going to a biomedical facility, to a doctor's office, to a hospital, but we wanted to seek out every option. And so I think that story from my own personal story is a really great example of this last kind of paragraph here, is that Latina people will not ignore doctors even if we have access to curanderas, because again, there was one in my community. She lived very close to us, so we went to see her first, right, on our way to the doctor. Moving on, I want to talk about the origins of curanderismo. This first source is from the California State University Northbridge. This is from the University Library, their special collections and archives, and it's an entry called An Aztec Herbal, First Medicinal Text Published in the Americas. Again, loosely paraphrased, what I have here, it says, I have a picture of a page from this book, and this says, the first book detailing traditional medicinal practices in Mexico was produced in 1552 by the Aztec doctor Martín de la Cruz, just 31 years after the Spanish conquest of Mexico. This is a mouthful, but it says, the Libellus de Medicinalibus Indorum Urbis, aka the Cruz Badiano Codex, was written in the Aztec language, Nahuatl, and translated into Latin. It listed 250 medicinal herbs commonly used in Aztec herbalism, and herbalism is a major practice under the umbrella of curanderismo. I want to emphasize that this is known as the Cruz Badiano Codex, naming the doctor that wrote this, which was Martín de la Cruz, and Badiano was the person who translated it to Latin. We fortunately, thankfully, have archives of this book. It is available if you look for it online. Curanderismo, the practice of it, the idea of it, dates back to 1552. That is such a long time ago. This is a practice that has been here for a long, long time. And it just makes me think that for non-believers out there, for skeptics, it feels like there has to be some validity to this, because how could there not be for it to be here for this long, for people to use it for this long? So to continue with the origins, the next source that I have is from the JAMA Network. It's an article. It's from 2001, and it's called The Use of Curanderismo in a Public Healthcare System. And this is by Padilla et al., so a group of people that put this together. But what I took from this here in the slide, it says, Curanderismo began with the Aztec, Maya, and Inca people and their religious beliefs of harmony with nature, spirit, and self. They had many gods and believed their gods punished sins with illness. Therefore, disease or illness was supernatural in nature. Some mortals who were spiritually chosen were given the power to heal the wounded spirit and cure the supernatural illness. This is the role of a curandere. And I built here a timeline from those three civilizations, basically marking just the beginning and the ending of their time as a peoples. Of course, all three ending with the Spanish conquest. Surprise, surprise. But again, to date back. So we have that Cruz Codex of the Aztec herbalism was written in about 1552. Just to give you an idea, and of course that was after the Aztec Empire fell by the hands of the Spanish. But the Maya people started farming their villages and forming their communities in 2000 BC. So more than 1,000 years before this codex was written. So this takes these people's origins all the way back there. Again, just to reiterate how long these practices might have been happening all this time. So again, it starts with 2000 BC with the founding of these Maya communities, and then jump to 1325 is when the Aztec established the city of Tenochtitlan, and then 1438 is about when the Inca people formed their civilizations. And then, of course, as time moves on, we cannot acknowledge current or modern curanderismo without talking about African influences on these practices. So the next source that I have here is from Arizona State University. This is a thesis, I believe, called African Healing in Mexican Curanderismo, and this is by Jesus C. Villa. This is for, I think, their master's thesis, and this was an amazing read. I kept finding when I was putting this presentation together, all of these sources, all of these scholarly articles and thesi, I don't know, about Curanderismo, and I wanted to read all of them, but they vary from, like I said, as short as like 7 pages to over 100 pages. And so it would take me so much time to read all of them, which I intend to do. So maybe I will come back sometime down the line with an update in a Curanderismo, a resurrection of this episode, if you will, because I'm like, wow, this is, I mean, of course it is its own field of study, and it's amazing what people have been able to learn and discover and put together for us to learn about now, right? But anyway, paraphrasing from Villa's thesis, I have here the worldviews and associated healing traditions of West and West Central Sub-Saharan Africans and their Afro-American descendants influenced the development of Curanderismo. Mexico had the second largest enslaved African population and the largest free Black population in the Western Hemisphere until the early 19th century. Afro-Mexican curanderos were regularly consulted by members of every level of Spanish colonial society. Determining the exact ethnic and geographic origins of most enslaved Africans brought to colonial Mexico is difficult because Iberian slavers did not document the precise origins of enslaved Africans. And this is something that I think we have in common. And by we, I mean Latina people, Hispanic people, Afro-Latina people, is because of the shitty history that our ancestors went through. There's a lot of kind of, I guess, scrambling, I'll say, to find out truly what our origins are, what they might be. And then at some point, you know, we have, like it mentions here, Mexico had the second largest enslaved African population and the largest free Black population in the Western Hemisphere until the early 19th century. So then those backgrounds also get mixed together, which, you know, in the grand scheme of things, I think the mixing of cultures is a beautiful thing, but sometimes it was born out of a traumatic past, right? But with that being said, there are tons of African influences in Curanderismo, and people that maybe do not have, as individuals, a direct connection to African cultures, like in their own ancestry. Culturally, they still do because they may have grown up with those practices. Curanderismo is one of those things that is passed down from person to person, from generation to generation. It's much like folklore. It's like an oral thing. It's not something that you can go to an institution and learn how to do. With the way that it's developed, there are many people that offer classes or trainings, more realistically, apprenticeships to learning curanderismo. But yeah, it's not the same as going to medical school to become a doctor. It's a lot more intimate, for lack of a better word, I guess. We've talked about some of these religions before, like Santeria is rooted in African and Afro-Latino practices, Palo Mayombe. I just pulled up an actual list on Wikipedia of African diaspora religions, and a lot of these are seen in Curanderismo. A lot of these will practice rituals or other types of practices that people could consider or would consider Curanderismo. So a list of some here. And this is a very long list. In the Bahamas, there's Haitian Voodoo, Obeya. In Belize, there's Dugo Obeya. In Brazil, there's Batuque, Candomblé, and then there's like a sub list of 3 other ones under Candomblé. There's Catimbo, Macumba. There's so many. Cuba, there is Cuban Voodoo, Palo, Santeria. Dominican Republic, there's Dominican Voodoo. In Guatemala, there's Dugu. In Guyana, Comfa and Obeya. Haiti, of course, Haitian Voodoo and Iboloa. Nicaragua, there's Dugu. In Puerto Rico, there's Sanse Espiritismo. There's some from St. Lucia. I'm just going to start naming the places that they're coming from because there's so many. From Trinidad and Tobago, Venezuela. There's so many subsects, if you will, of these traditional religions that are either heavily influenced by or based in African diaspora religions. But again, through time, there has been a mix of these practices and these religions, and a lot of them do things, again, that would fall under the umbrella of Curanderismo. But I just thought that was important to talk about and to address, because we can't talk about modern Curanderismo without talking about those influences. And because Afro-Latino people very much exist and they are very much part of the Latina diaspora, for some reason that is hard for certain people to understand. And by certain people, I mean racist people, that like Black people exist in all cultures and ethnicities, but that is a different conversation. As mentioned earlier, there are 4 major practices of Curanderismo, and those 4 being sobadores, or people who do body work or massages, yerberos, so herbalists, so much like the Martin Cruz Codex and his book of Aztec herbalism. Then there are espiritualistas, so people that do a lot of the psychic work. And then there are hueseros, and so people who do, again, this is a type of body work, but this is more about your bones and stuff. And again, so let me tell you another story. I've been to another curandero before in my life. I went twice. Well, the second one was a story that I told earlier about going to the curandera in our neighborhood before going to the hospital. The first one that I went to, it was sometime when I was in like high school, and I think I've told this story before, but when I was in elementary, I suffered a really bad fall. I fell from the balcony of an apartment complex because I was being a little like silver teeth antics. I was being a rowdy kid, not listening to my parents, and I took the opportunity when my family was busy to like sneak out and go play when I was told not to, because it was dangerous. And so what I liked to do when I was a kid, I loved to climb trees. I loved to climb anything. What I was doing was I was playing on the railing of the staircase of this apartment complex, and it was an outdoor railing, and it was metal, and it had just rained. But me, a kid, not putting that together in my head, was like, oh, this is fine. I'm going to keep climbing these railings. And I slipped and I fell from the balcony. Obviously, spoiler alert, I lived. Or did I? Thankfully, the only thing that I broke was my arm. That story in itself is really weird because my mom will still tell this story, and I still remember it, honestly. It's a very vivid memory, which is really strange, is that I remember the fall itself. I don't really remember much of the day that it happened or after, but I remember the fall itself. And my mom will still tell this story that when I woke up in the hospital and they were asking me about it, asking me what happened, they put it together, right? But when they were asking for my perspective on it, apparently I said that when I was falling, that I was falling in slow motion and I felt like I was being carried. And that I could see everything around me, going up, of course, because I was going down. I saw it happening in slow motion, and that it felt as if right before I hit the ground, that's when I was dropped. But that up until like a foot above the ground, I don't know, as a kid, I was just like, it was in slow motion to me. That story in itself has always been very interesting to me. I truly believe that somebody was watching out to me because I was a small kid, small little body. I fell straight onto concrete and I came out with only a broken arm. So grateful. Thank you for whichever spirit was out there guarding my dumb ass. I really appreciate it. Thanks for keeping me here. But yeah, so there's that. But then because of that, my arm was the only thing that I broke, but of course that was not good for my body. In high school, I was having really terrible back pain, and my parents took me to a curandero in Weslaco, Texas, if anybody knows where that is. And of course, it was by word of mouth, and my parents didn't know this person. They were just told, take him to this guy. This is his address. And they took me in, and as soon as we walked in, I'll never forget, this guy looked at me and he said, this boy had a really bad fall like a long time ago, right? And my parents and I just looked at each other I don't know this guy. I didn't tell him anything. And so then he had me stand in front of a mirror and he was observing my body and the way that I was standing. And I stood with like one shoulder higher than the other and just analyzing it. And I'll never forget. It was so funny to me at the time. And I think I told this story on the Soul Solace episode as well. But he took a can of WD-40 and he started spraying my arms and he was massaging it. And I could feel all these bumps in like my bone on my forearm, on both of them. And he was just massaging them out and it really hurt. And then he started grabbing my wrist and he was like, relájate, relax yourself, relax. And I was like, I'm relaxed. I don't know what you want me to do. He's like shaking my arm and then he just like pulls it over his head. And I just felt everything from my wrist all the way down to my ribs just crack. And he did that on both sides. And then the same thing, sprayed WD-40 on my back, massaging it out, cracking my bones and doing all this stuff to me. The next day I went to school. I mean, I felt so much better. The next day I went to school, no pain. And I'll never forget, one of my friends, we were walking together and she looked at me and she said, "You look different. Like you just look different. Did you do something?" I said, "I don't know. Like, I haven't gotten my hair cut. I haven't done anything. Like, these are old clothes. Like, I don't know. I was confused." She goes, "I don't know." She said, "You look lighter. You look like you're more relaxed. You look taller." She's like, "Your posture is different. Did you go see a doctor?" And I was like, kind of. And I could have gone to a doctor and I probably still could, but this was someone that was based in the community, someone that was providing culturally relevant services to the community and that my family felt comfortable taking me to because they trusted the people that recommended him. And so again, just my personal experience with a huesero, and probably he would be considered a sobador as well. But to continue, and there's a really great painting here from an artist called Mario Gonzalez Chavajay, and it's a painting called Curandero. I'll post it, of course, on the social medias. It's called Curandero, and it's this man in this room with several people doing body work, and there's like yerbas and what looks like a pot or like a cauldron, if you will, smoke in the air. And so, I mean, that's basically what happened to me when I went. But it was one curandero and there's several people working on the guy on this painting. It's a great painting. Of course I'll post it online for you all. Welcome back, old friends. The next thing that I have here is I just wanted to do a nod to famous curanderes of our times. I'm going to read a little bit about them as well. Probably one of the most popular ones, at least in South Texas, is Don Pedrito Jaramillo, who was on this earth from 1829 to 1907. And then we have Teresa Urrea, who was here from 1873 to 1906. And then lastly, another very, very popular one that I think many people would recognize, especially on the candles. I think both him and Don Pedrito Jaramillo have candles, is El Niño Fidencio, who was alive from 1898 to 1938. Okay, so just to read a bit about each of them, I'm going to start with Don Pedro Jaramillo. And this is, of course, a Wikipedia entry. And this says, Jaramillo was born in Guadalajara, Jalisco, Mexico, to Purepecha indigenous parents. The Purepecha are commonly known as the Tarasco indigenous people of Mexico. Don Pedro Jaramillo died in modern-day Brooks County, Texas, on July 3rd, 1907. Jaramillo first came to notice when he arrived at the Los Olmos Ranch near Falfurrias, Texas, announced he was a curandero, and began treating the Mexican families in the region. At the height of his career, families from as far away as New York City would travel to seek help from Jaramillo. I'm sure travel was a lot different than it is now. For word of mouth to travel to New York City and for people to seek his services from New York City back then, to make that trek is amazing. And I think it's a testament to the work that he did. This continues. Jaramillo's story as a curandero begins when he was suffering from a nose ailment and as a cure, daubed his nose with mud at the edge of a pool. 3 days of this self-prescribed treatment cured the ailment. However, it left Jaramillo with an identifying scar on his nose. On the third night of his treatment, Jaramillo believed he heard a voice telling him God had given him the power to heal. Testing such power, he prescribed a tepid bath to his master, which was said to heal his ailment. The first accounts of his cures and powers were collected and printed in 1934 in Spanish. They were later, in 1951, translated to English. Don Pedro is not only noted for his healing, but also his generosity. In Alice, Texas, it was recorded that he would sometimes buy $500 worth of goods at a time simply to feed the poor. On his travels, Don Pedro was accompanied by a friend, Teofilo Barraza. Because of Don Pedro's popularity, large groups of people would camp at Los Olmos Creek, waiting for his return from a curing trip. There is a shrine at his burial site on FM Highway 1418 in Falfurrias, and also a state historical marker. The Texas State Historical Marker was dedicated in 1971 and is the first in Texas to be written in both English and Spanish. His popularity continues, and he has even had songs written about him. So this is an area of Texas that I pass by every time that I am traveling to and from the Rio Grande Valley. I've never stopped there, and I've been thinking about it lately as I've been putting this presentation together that I really, really want to. So hopefully soon I will stop by and pay Don Pedro Jaramillo my respects, and of course give you all an update about it. The next person, of course, that I had here is Teresa Urrea. And of course, we're going to read from the Wikipedia entry. This says, in the fall of 1889, Urrea had a serious illness and began to experience religious visions. When she recovered, she believed she had been given healing powers by the Virgin Mary. And she soon gained a following when 1,200 people camped nearby to seek healing and observe miracles. Indigenous people began to call her the Saint of Cabora. She drew criticism from church officials for giving informal sermons in which she drew attention to clerical abuses. It was reported in the church that she was always friendly with the sick, especially with the poor, without ever getting angry, demonstrating an exemplary humility. She would often go without rest from dawn until sometimes late at night. The Mexican press began to cover her activities in December 1889, notably the newspaper El Monitor Republicano of Mexico City. Urrea predicted an impending flood that would destroy all places except a few she designated. One of the designated places was Jambiobampo, Sonora, which was the center of preaching by Damian Quijano, a Mayo inspired by Urrea's teachings, whose father had been a general under Cajeme, warning against the Mexicans. Urrea was venerated as a folk saint among the Yaqui and Mayo peoples, who are indigenous to the Sonora Desert near the United States border. A drought in the states of Chihuahua and Sonora, along with economic and political instability, led the village of Tomochic, Chihuahua, to seek her guidance. A violent confrontation occurred there between villagers and government authorities on December 7, 1891. A second village revolt on December 26 routed 40 soldiers, and Urrea left the area to avoid being blamed for the incidents. Nonetheless, the government held her responsible and exiled Urrea and her father in May 1892. They settled in Nogales, Arizona. The Tomochitecos, however, continued their armed resistance against the government in her name. In response, government troops razed Tomochic in October 1892, and 300 villagers had died in the struggle by the end of that year. Some modern sources credit Urrea for the religious fervor with which the outnumbered Tomochitecos resisted government forces. She sounds amazing, and putting this presentation together was the first time I heard of her. What an amazing person, right? To not only heal people, but to inspire them. The really brief summary at the top says that Teresa Urrea, often referred to as Teresita and also known as Santa Teresa or La Santa de Cabora, the Saint of Cabora, among the Mayo, was a Mexican mystic, folk healer, and revolutionary insurgent. Love her for that. And then, of course, as mentioned, the third curandero that I have here is El Niño Fidencio. And of course, we're reading from a Wikipedia entry. Before I read El Niño Fidencios, I feel like it would be really cool to do an episode about either one episode for each of these people or an episode for all three of them. But let me know if that's something that you all would be interested in. I'm going to do it either way. I just want to figure out the format of how I want to present them, or if there are any other folk healers that you would be interested in hearing about. But to continue, this entry on El Niño Fidencio says that his real name was José Fidencio Constantino Cintora, now venerated by the Fidencista Christian Church. His father was a day laborer and married to María del Tránsito Cintora. He had 4 brothers, and at the age of 10, he was orphaned by his father and mother. His brother, 2 years younger than him, was his inseparable companion. The Catholic Church, of course, does not recognize him as an official saint, but his cult, as they call it here in this Wikipedia entry, has spread throughout much of the northern Mexico and southern United States. In primary school, he met Father Segura's nephew, Enrique Lopez de la Fuente, who was the janitor and his friend, and later his protector. Both helped the priest in religious services. It is thought that with him, Fidencio learned to perform healings with herbs. So Fidencio was also an herbalist. It's said that Fidencio was famous for performing operations using pieces of glass without anesthesia and without causing any pain to his patients, and for relating his cures to specific places in the town, such as a puerile tree from which he would throw fruits and objects at the patients. Those who received the blows were healed. He also submerged his followers in a muddy puddle that was located on the outskirts of town. In his life, he inspired the appearance of a multitude of imitators and impostors, and even the death of one of them was confused with that of his. The death of the impostor was announced by the press, and his funeral motivated a massive attendance. Fidencio's actual death came just over a year later. Decades later, he dominates the economy of the town of Espinazo, since his fame is the key to the town's tourist activity, as well as the sale of products more or less related to his cures and himself. So Espinazo looks like it's going to be another place that I need to pay a visit to. So to continue on with the presentation, one of the final things that I have here is to talk about Curanderismo today and how it exists today. So, of course, there are people who try and stay as true as possible to traditional practices. And I feel like there's a big resurgence of that, of returning to those traditional practices. But I think some of the most popular ones, and when I was looking at examples of this online, I kept coming across Facebook ads, and I was joking with my friends that I feel like it's something that needs to be studied, is the art and the graphic design of these advertisements. They all have a similar kind of vibe. They're extremely word heavy. They're very, if you were to read it out loud, it gives you that kind of infomercial or late night TV salesperson, or one of those lawyer advertisements that you hear on the radio or you see in a commercial. Have you been hit by a car? You may be entitled to compensation. Call 555-555-5555. Truck accident, car accident, scooter accident. It's one of those things where it's just coming at you like rapid speed, and it's very interesting. But again, I mean, these are people who are trusted in their community for the most part, as far as I would assume, right? One of these, her advertisement even goes so far to say as, you don't pay for the work until you see results. Many curanderes will operate, and this isn't something that I mentioned yet, but many of them in the past traditionally, and many still do, as with this person, they operate on a donation-based kind of thing. Is they do the work for you and they say, just pay me in a donation, pay me what you can or what you want to. And again, to me, that just adds to the validity of their work. Because if they were scammers, you would think they would, and not to say that everybody that does this is a scammer, right? But why would a scammer tell you, well, don't pay me until you see results, or you can pay me after you see results, or pay a donation, right? And again, that's not to say that people who do charge standard fees or they have rates for their work are scammers, which I think many more people should do if they're offering this work. It makes me kind of think that way. And I think the last thing that I have here in this presentation was about some related listening. You heard me several times mention the episode that I did with Monica from Soul Solace. And I think a lot of what she said informed this presentation as well, and validated a lot of what I knew or my experiences with other curanderes. I think it's an interesting listen. I think the work that Monica is doing and people like Monica are doing is important work to the community. If you haven't listened to the episode, go check it out. Welcome back, old friends. Now, I know that may not have been super spooky for some of you, but for many people, accessing services like mental health services or physical health services can be a daunting task for people. It can be tricky, it can be scary, and it doesn't have to be. There are many sorts of resources out there, and I feel like I've said this on the show before, is that any good witch will make recommendations and do their practices without ignoring biomedical interventions, because sometimes they are necessary and they can be used in tandem. It's all about, I think, holistic care, at least from my perspective. Anyway, thank you for listening to today's episode. I really appreciate it. And again, let me know if you would be interested in hearing about each of those curanderes that I mentioned in the episode, or if you know of any spiritual healers that are very popular and that you would like me to explore. One more time, if you have not yet, please visit vote.austinchronicle.com and vote for me for Best Podcast and Best Radio or Podcast Host. Again, Susto Best Podcast, Ayden Castellanos Best Host. Super thankful just for being nominated as a finalist. It means so much to me. But think of how exciting it would be for me to have a title to add, to the list of the awards. I only have one so far, but that's so far. Let's put another one on there so we can really mean it when we say award-winning podcast, Susto. Anyway, thank you all so much for being here. I really appreciate it. If you would like to support the show in another easy, free way, you can do so by interacting with the show wherever you are listening, leaving a 5-star rating or review either on Apple Podcasts or on Spotify, and sharing it with your ghoul friends. Put them on. Everybody is always looking for a podcast. Let them know, hey, I love this one. Listen to this guy and vote for him for Best of Austin. And let's grow the Susto fam. You know what I mean? Speaking of the Susto fam, huge shout out to this episode's patrons. You are Liza, Sadie, Rachel, Alejandra, Luther, April, Mario, Eva, Dee, Josette, Sam, Angeline Co, Mandy, Jules, Lori, Jeannie, Desiree, Anna, Ashes, Neresa, Rachel, Azucena, Rios, Anna, Marlene, Chata, Lainey, Desiree, Aaliyah, Holly, Cynthia, Carla, and Lupe. Thank you all for your support. It means truly so much to me. If you haven't yet, visit the GoFundMe. The link is in my bio. We are raising money to invest in a new recording setup for Susto. Of course, signing up as a patron helps, but if you would like to make a one-time donation or an additional donation, you can visit gofund.me/10bcdc27 to make a donation today. I will talk to you all in the next one, and until then, give me your arm. I'm going to spray some WD-40 on it real quick. Bye.